Afghanistan, a land republic in Central Asia, bordered by Iran, Pakistan, Tajikistan, China, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. Throughout the Middle Ages, the area was dominated by Muslim armies and Mongol kingdoms, and it was also known from the time of Alexander the Great as a transit area for parts of the historically important Silk Road. Afghanistan is one of the world's poorest countries, which for generations has been marked by internal and external conflicts. The country was occupied by the Soviet Union from 1979 to 1989. After the terrorist attack on the United States on September 11, 2001, a US-led force invaded the country and overthrew the Taliban in power. Since then, international forces, including Norwegian participation with military personnel, have been at war with the Taliban. Geography and environment: Afghanistan's land area is 647,500 square kilometers. The country is dominated by the large mountain range Hindu Kush, and by mountain terrain with little vegetation. Farthest north, west and south, the landscape is flatter. The country has a typical inland climate, with hot summers and cold winters. Most of the population lives off simple farming with livestock, although only 12% of Afghanistan's land is arable. In some places it has been possible to continue planting fruit trees, which before the acts of war of recent decades provided many families with income, and laid the foundation for a significant conservation industry. In many places, the country's significant coniferous forest areas have suffered major damage. The same applies to almond and nut trees, which have been important both for the local population and for animals. War and extreme poverty have also created significant environmental challenges in many places in Afghanistan. Uneven water supply, lack of treatment plants and poor sanitation still pose a great danger to life and health. Unsecured storage of chemicals and runoff from landfills and agriculture also cause environmental and health problems. People and society: Afghanistan has about 31 million inhabitants, 2012. The country has a very young population. Half are under 15 years of age. The authorities' priorities often reflect the aforementioned. A report published by the United Nations Population Fund in October 2013 states that Afghanistan is the country where it is most difficult to grow old. The report is based on a survey of a total of 91 countries. The largest population groups are Pashtuns, approximately 45%, Tajiks, approximately 25%, Hazaras, approximately 10%, and Uzbeks, approximately 9%, Turkmens, approximately 3%, and Balochs, approximately 3%. The local ethnicity is strong and weakens the national identity. About 36% of the population lives below the UN poverty line. The nomads, the Kuchis, are the poorest population. The situation is also critical for an increasing number of internally displaced Afghans. The population consists mainly of Sunni Muslims. The two official languages are Pashto and Dari. Men and women live largely separate, and various polls show that Afghanistan is the world's worst country for women. In a survey by Oxfam in 2011, 87% of Afghan women state that they have been subjected to physical violence, rape and/or forced marriage. In parts of Afghanistan, the health situation is critical, especially for people on the outskirts and for internally displaced persons. Lung infections, diarrhea, especially in the summer, musculoskeletal disorders, skin infections, parasites, deficiency diseases and malnutrition characterize the disease picture for very many. Children and pregnant women in particular are at risk. HIV/AIDS is also widespread. State and politics: Afghanistan is an Islamic republic. It is headed by the president and two vice presidents. These are elected in direct elections for a period of 5 years, with the possibility of being re-elected once. The president is also the head of government and he appoints the ministers, who must be approved by the National Assembly, Milli Shura. President from September 2014 is Ashraf Ghani, who took over from Hamid Karzai. Former Foreign Minister Abdullah Abdullah is the executive head of government, in effect the Prime Minister. Administratively, Afghanistan is divided into 34 provinces. Each province is governed by a government-appointed governor. A contentious issue in Afghan politics is that politicians and administrative staff tend to have greater loyalty to local clan leaders than to the government in Kabul, which generally has limited control outside the capital. The population has a tradition of local self-government based on family dynasties and tribal leaders, and domestic strife has been extensively attempted through so-called jirgahs. These are council meetings where the elders of the local community have a decisive influence, and where discussions leading to consensus are central. The judiciary has 3 levels, with the Supreme Court as the Supreme Court. Its 9 judges are appointed by the President and approved by the National Assembly, with a term of office of 10 years. According to the new constitution, the courts are independent of both the legislature and the executive. Judgments that carry the death penalty must be approved by the President. The new constitution states that none of the country's laws must be in conflict with Islam, but the constitution is not based on Sharia rules. From the 18th of June 2013, Afghan police and defense forces formally took over responsibility for security in the country, while 100,000 foreign soldiers who are still in Afghanistan will have support functions and conduct training. The Afghan forces number about 350,000 people, but their fighting power is weakened by weak discipline, corruption, desertion and infiltration from various rebel forces. In addition, the Taliban and other rebel groups have made police and military personnel a priority target for their attacks. Recent Afghan history is dominated by Pashtun tribes, who under the leadership of Ahmed Shah Durrani created an empire based in Kandahar in the south of the country. Under Durrani's rule, the border was drawn towards Pakistan, a border determination that the Pakistani authorities still dispute. The capital was moved from Kandahar to Kabul in 1776, and in the years that followed Afghanistan became largely a buffer zone between British and Russian imperialism. Afghanistan gained national independence from Britain on the 19th of August 1919 and was formally a monarchy until 1978 when Afghanistan's Democratic Republic was established. The modernization carried out by the country's king from 1933, Muhammad Zahir Shah, from the mid-1960s was interrupted, when the king was ousted in 1973 through a coup. Years of civil war and sharp internal strife followed, and during the Christmas weekend of 1979, Soviet troops moved into Afghanistan, allegedly at the request of those in power at the time. The so-called Mujahideen fought against the invading forces, with support from Pakistan, Saudi Arabia and the United States. After nearly 10 years of occupation, the Soviet forces were withdrawn. They left behind great military and civilian casualties as well as extensive material destruction. The chaotic years that followed gave the Taliban militia the opportunity to emerge as a guarantor of peace and order, and from 1996 onwards, religious extremists controlled most of the country. For several years, Al-Qaeda was allowed to hold training camps in the country in exchange for funding much of the Taliban's activities. A few weeks after Al-Qaeda's attack on the United States on September 11, 2001, Afghanistan was attacked by an international alliance, which under US leadership quickly defeated the Taliban forces. At an Afghan summit under the auspices of the UN, a provisional government was formed in December 2001, dominated by the Tajik-led Northern Alliance, with Pashtun Hamid Karzai as head of government. In January 2004, a new constitution was adopted by a council of 502 members, of which 100 were women. Developments since 2013 have shown that the Taliban and other resistance groups are gaining ground and have increasingly been able to challenge Afghan security forces. This is partly due to the withdrawal of allied forces from the country, and partly to a marked increase in the number of foreign fighters seeking Afghan territory, especially from and via Pakistan. In the new year 2015, the Taliban announced one of its traditional spring offensives. The aim was to maintain control over smuggling routes in the southwest of the country and to direct new attacks on the government army and on public buildings and installations, partly with the help of suicide bombers. At the turn of the year 2014-15, resistance groups also emerged who have declared support and sympathy with the Iraqi jihadist group Islamic State, IS. Some groups' loyalty to this extreme unit could eventually weaken the Taliban, but at the same time, actions under the auspices of IS, as has already been seen, could dramatically worsen conditions for the civilian population, primarily in the east, in the border areas with Pakistan. In March 2016, the Taliban launched another spring offensive with new attacks on both civilian and public buildings. At the same time, the UN Special Envoy to Afghanistan, the South African lawyer Nicholas Haysom, gave a briefing to the UN Security Council. He drew a gloomy picture of the situation in Afghanistan, a picture with 5 main points. 1. The Afghan economy is in free fall. Very high unemployment, especially among young people. 2. The security situation is very serious. The Taliban is making significant progress. Profound division within the country's political elite. Poor cooperation between President Ghani and Prime Minister Abdullah. 4. About 3/4 of the country's public budgets are financed by external support. Weak trust as a result of widespread corruption creates uncertainty as to whether foreign aid will be maintained at current levels. 5. Peace talks between the government and the Taliban are making little progress, especially the Taliban are hesitant. Economy and business. For decades, the Afghan economy has suffered from acts of war, misrule and corruption. The agricultural potential has been little utilized as a result of extensive poverty, poor infrastructure and mined areas. For the same reasons, foreign investors have shown little interest in rebuilding companies or investing in the extraction of the many minerals, including iron and copper, as well as oil and gas resources that Afghanistan possesses. If the framework conditions improve, the mining sector will be the mainstay of sustainable development and will be able to finance national security and stabilize the country's political system. But the fall height is great. Increasing revenues from mining can increase corruption, strengthen dubious investors and strengthen the basis for armed conflict. The World Bank's figures in 2012 showed that about 95% of the country's gross national product comes from aid and military presence. The results of extensive development assistance are debatable and controversial, but the results are particularly significant in health and education. An increasing number of Afghans have received schooling and health care, and the improvement for women and girls is most marked. Withdrawal of foreign military forces in 2014 will undoubtedly mean that difficult living conditions for many Afghans will be further aggravated. The Afghan authorities have therefore stepped up their efforts to increase foreign investment in the country. Central to this picture are China and India, both of which have funded development projects in Afghanistan for several years, while companies from Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates and Turkey are being considered for utilization of the country's oil and gas deposits. Knowledge and culture. More than 30 years of war and conflict have destroyed much of the education system in Afghanistan, and the country has widespread illiteracy. Under the Taliban regime, girls were denied schooling, and even for men, the educational offer was very deficient. Surveys in 2002-03 showed that only every other Afghan man could read and write, while as many as 80% of women were illiterate. Since then, the education system has been central to the reconstruction of Afghanistan and the peace process in the country. UNESCO and other UN organizations have been particularly active, with financial and professional support from, among others, Norway. While about 1 million children went to school in 2001, the number in 2010 was over 7 million. Many years of war and destruction have eroded Afghanistan's rich cultural heritage, but the country can still display unique cultural treasures from periods during Buddhism as well as the time under Islamic rule. Statues, distinctive architectural domed buildings, magnificent minarets, rich pictorial and painting art are key keywords for a cultural heritage that has at least partially survived weathering and violent attacks. Afghanistan has a rich theatrical tradition based on street performances where the narrators, supplemented by songs and ballads, recite in a singing way poems about warlords and religious heroes, their lives and deeds. Music, like other cultural manifestations, was strongly suppressed when the Taliban controlled most of Afghanistan. Now the musical traditions are expressed with great variety, ethnic and regional. Most popular are lute instruments in various varieties, but you also meet flutes, drums, mouth harp and various rhythm instruments. Indian popular music is quite widespread, and in nightclubs with a more modern touch, you will be able to hear Western popular music. But even places like this will often be a little cautious, partly out of respect for Islamic orthodoxy, which is quite widespread, partly so as not to provoke extreme, violent reactions to Western lifestyles. Coin in 2002, a new currency with the same name as the old currency unit from 1927 was introduced, Afghani. Before 1927, the official currency was the rupee, where 1 rupee corresponded to 60 paisa. Weights and measures. The metric system has been introduced and is increasingly used. Otherwise, local units are used, for example in Kabul for weight, 1 seer, 7.1 kilograms, a 4 karak, 1.77 kilograms, a 4 pow, 442 grams, a 4 kud, 110.5 grams. For length measurements, 1 gas equals 101.6 centimeters.